The bent nails sang against iron as Jang straightened each one by candlelight, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. Outside, laughter spilled from the saloon where ranch hands wagered their week's pay on whiskey and cards. They called him Tightwad Jang, the rancher who'd squeeze a penny until it screamed for mercy. Martha, the store owner's wife, understood differently. She'd seen his ledger once, every saved cent marked for something called Project Winter. She watched him patch the patches on his coat, save string from feed sacks, haggle over rusty hinges. The other ranchers bought their warmth with cords of expensive wood. Jang had other plans. That evening, as frost painted warnings on window panes, Sarah Whitfield arrived, the new school teacher from Boston. She'd board at the Widow Thompson's place, 2 miles from Jang's modest ranch. Winter was coming early this year, the old-timers said, studying the restless horses and early flying geese. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Dawn found Jang at the river bend, his breath clouding in the cold morning air as he hefted another smooth stone from the water. Each one he tested with the tin coffee pot he'd heated over last night's coals, pressing the hot metal against the rock and counting slowly. Some stones held heat for 30 seconds, others for nearly a minute. Those he kept, loading them carefully into his wagon. Young Tommy Morrison had followed him again, the boy's curiosity stronger than his fear of being seen with Tightwad Jiang. "What you building, Mr. Jiang? My pa says you're touched in the head." "Your pa's entitled to his opinion," Jiang replied, testing another stone. "Here, help me load these good ones." By noon, Jacob Fletcher had ridden over to investigate. He found Jang behind his cabin, mixing clay with straw and sand, the consistency checked repeatedly between his fingers. "That's good adobe mixture," Jacob observed. "Building yourself a new chimney." "Something like that." Jiang didn't look up from his work. Jacob rode straight to town. Within an hour, the saloon buzzed with speculation. "Root cellar," declared one ranch hand. "Monument to his own stinginess," laughed another. The banker suggested Jang had finally lost his mind completely. Sarah Whitfield observed from the schoolhouse window as Jang's wagon passed, loaded with old iron pipes he'd traded a week's labor to retrieve from the abandoned Garrison mine. The children pressed against the glass, whispering about the crazy rancher. She hushed them gently, but couldn't deny her own curiosity. That evening, she walked past his property on her Constitutional and glimpsed him through the window, bent over what appeared to be architectural drawings by lamplight. The sketches showed something she recognized from her studies channels and chambers, like the Roman heating system she'd read about in her father's engineering journals. But surely that was impossible. This was Colorado territory, not ancient Rome. As October waned, Jiang worked with increasing urgency. The first frost had already killed the tomatoes, and the farmer's almanac predicted the worst winter in a decade. Martha at the general store noticed him buying unusual items: fire bricks, iron grates, lengths of sheet metal, always haggling, always paying in carefully counted coins. "What's your game, Jiang?" she asked finally. He smiled, the expression rare on his weathered face. "Staying warm, Martha. Just staying warm." That night, the temperature dropped below freezing for the first time. Winter was no longer coming, it had arrived. The platform took shape beside Jang's cast iron stove like something from another world, 8 feet long, 3 feet wide, rising 2 feet off the floor. The townspeople gathered daily now, some bringing lunch baskets, treating the spectacle like a county fair attraction. Jang worked steadily, methodically, apparently oblivious to their presence. "Looks like he's building his own tomb," Preacher Williams declared, his voice carrying across the yard. "Right size for laying out a body." The laughter that followed made Sarah Whitfield's cheeks burn. She'd been watching from behind the schoolhouse fence, her students dismissed for lunch. The structure was fascinating layers of stone and clay, with channels running beneath like veins. She'd seen similar designs in her father's books about ancient civilizations. "Maybe he plans to sleep on it," suggested Dale Cooper, the saloon keeper. like them Egyptian pharaohs. More likely, he's finally lost what little sense God gave him, Jacob Fletcher said, though Sarah noticed he studied the construction with keen interest. Still, those channels he's carved, they connect to his stove somehow. The betting book at the saloon grew daily. $5 said Jiang would abandon the project by November. $10 said the whole thing would collapse. 20 said he'd freeze to death trying to prove whatever point he was trying to make. As October ended, Jiang installed a complex system of iron pipes beneath the platform. The pipes connected to his stove's chimney, creating a maze of passages before exiting through the cabin wall. He sealed each joint with clay, testing and retesting for leaks with smoke from burning sage. Sarah could bear the curiosity no longer. That evening, she approached with a basket of food. "Mr. Jiang, you've been working without pause. Please, take some supper." He looked up, surprise flickering across his features. His hands were raw from handling stones, his clothes dusty with clay. "That's kind, Miss Whitfield, but unnecessary. Nonsense. Even the thriftiest man must eat." She set the basket on his makeshift workbench, noticing the books scattered there: Principles of Heat Transfer, Roman Engineering, The Preservation of Warmth in Northern Climates. "You're building a hypocaust," she said suddenly, "like the Romans used for heating their baths." Jiang's eyes sharpened. "You know of such things." "My father was Charles Whitfield, chief engineer for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. He studied ancient engineering extensively." She traced the sketches with one finger. "But why firewood is available, even if expensive?" "My father died of pneumonia," Jiang said quietly. "The first personal information he'd ever volunteered. Froze to death in his own bed because we couldn't afford enough wood during the winter of '71. I was 16, working the rails in Nebraska. By the time I got word and made it home, he was already in the ground." Sarah's hand found his arm. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Just help me mix this next batch of clay, if you're willing to dirty your hands." She rolled up her sleeves. "Show me the proportions." They worked until darkness fell, Sarah holding the lamp while Jiang applied the final layer of clay to the platform's surface. Tomorrow he would add the river stones as a final covering, smooth and heat-retaining. The first test would come soon after. "They're calling it Jiang's tomb," Sarah said as she prepared to leave. "Let them." He tested the clay's consistency one more time. "When the first blizzard hits and their wood piles run low, we'll see who's laughing." That night, the temperature plummeted. Ice formed on the water troughs, and horses clustered together for warmth. At the general store, Martha noticed people buying extra blankets, extra wood, extra everything. The Farmer's Almanac had been specific. The worst winter in a decade was no longer a prediction, but a promise. Jiang worked through the night by lantern light, racing against time. The platform was nearly complete, but nearly wasn't enough. He needed 3 more days for the clay to cure, for the final adjustments, for the first crucial test. The next morning brought news that chilled the town more than any frost. The telegraph operator announced a massive storm system moving down from Canada. 3 days, maybe 4, before it arrived. Dale Cooper raised the betting stakes at the saloon. $50 says Jiang's contraption kills him before the winter does. "You're on," Jacob Fletcher said quietly, surprising everyone. "I've been watching him work. That man knows something we don't." Sarah organized her students to help gather the final stones from the river, turning it into a natural history lesson. The children competed to find the smoothest, most perfectly rounded ones, their laughter echoing across the cold landscape as they worked. By evening, Jiang had placed the last stone on the platform's surface, creating a smooth sleeping area above the hidden channels. The platform now resembled a raised bed made entirely of stone and clay, connected to his stove by the mysterious pipe system. "Tomorrow," he told Sarah, who'd stayed to help despite the scandalous whispers about a single woman spending time with the town recluse. "Tomorrow we test it." She noticed his hands trembling not from cold, but from exhaustion and perhaps fear. 7 years of planning, saving, and studying had led to this moment. If it failed, he'd be the laughingstock of the territory. If it succeeded, "It will work," she said firmly. "The engineering is sound." "Engineering isn't the problem," Jiang replied, looking at the darkening sky. "Time is. That storm won't wait for Clay to cure or mistakes to be fixed." That night, neither of them slept. Jiang tended his fire, making small adjustments to the airflow. Sarah graded papers by lamplight, but found herself repeatedly drawn to the window, watching the smoke from Jiang's chimney rise straight up in the still air, the calm before the storm. The smoke moved through the channels like a living thing, visible through the small glass windows Jiang had installed at key points in the platform. Sarah watched, mesmerized, as the white wisps traveled the full 20 feet of passages before emerging from the exterior pipe, now barely warm to the touch. "The smoke enters at nearly 400 degrees, Jiang explained, adjusting the damper he'd fashioned from sheet metal. "By the time it exits, it's given most of its heat to the stone and clay. That heat radiates upward through the platform for hours after the fire dies." Sarah knelt beside the platform, her hand pressed against the smooth river stones. They were warm, pleasantly so, like sun-heated rocks in summer. "How long will it retain the heat?" "If my calculations are correct, 8 to 10 hours. One evening, fire should keep the bed warm until dawn." Word of the test spread quickly. By noon, a dozen townspeople had gathered, including Jacob Fletcher, who'd brought his wife and children. Martha from the general store arrived with her husband, and even Preacher Williams appeared, Bible tucked under his arm as if prepared to perform last rites. "Show us how it works, Jiang," Jacob said, his tone respectful rather than mocking. Jiang built a modest fire in the stove, using only a quarter of the wood most families burned in an evening. The gathered crowd watched as smoke began flowing through the transparent sections of the channel system. Within an hour, the entire platform radiated warmth. "May I?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward the platform. "Please." Jiang helped her sit on the edge, maintaining proper distance but watching her reaction carefully. "It's wonderful," she said, her voice filled with genuine amazement. "Like sitting on a warm summer stone, but in November." Young Tommy Morrison scrambled up beside her before his mother could protest. "It's like magic," he exclaimed, lying back on the stones. "Ma, you gotta feel this." One by one, the townspeople approached, touching, sitting, marveling. The warmth was undeniable, comfortable, and strangely soothing. Martha's husband, a practical man who rarely showed emotion, stood silent for a long moment before speaking. "How much to build one?" "The materials cost about $8, Jiang replied. "Most of it's labor gathering stones, mixing clay, installing pipes. A family working together could build one in a week. $8. Dale Cooper had arrived from the saloon, his skepticism evident. "That's impossible. We spend that much on firewood in 2 weeks come January." "That's the point." Jiang showed them his ledger, every expense meticulously recorded. Initial construction cost, then minimal wood for the rest of winter. The platform holds heat from one evening fire until morning. The banker, Mr. Harrison, pushed forward. "If this works as you claim, why hasn't everyone built one?" "Because the knowledge was lost," Sarah interjected. "The Romans used this system 2,000 years ago. Mr. Jiang has simply adapted it using modern materials and frontier ingenuity." That evening, as the crowd dispersed, Jacob Fletcher lingered. When they were alone, he spoke quietly. "That storm's coming fast. Telegraph says 2 days, maybe less. You'll need help finishing the seal. I work better alone." "No." Jacob's interruption was firm. "You've proven your point. Now let us help. I'll bring my boys tonight. After dark, if you prefer. We know stonework." Jiang studied the man who'd mocked him for months. "Why?" "Because I've got 4 children, and last winter we burned every stick of furniture we could spare. My wife cried when we had to break up her grandmother's rocking chair for kindling. Jacob's voice roughened. If this thing of yours works, it means no family has to choose between heirlooms and heat. That night, 3 shadows appeared at Jang's door, Jacob and his 2 eldest sons. They worked in efficient silence, sealing joints, adjusting stones, reinforcing weak points Jang had worried about. Sarah arrived at midnight with coffee and sandwiches, having told the widow Thompson she was tending a sick friend. "This is highly improper," Martha said, appearing with her husband and a basket of donuts still warm from her oven. "A lady shouldn't be out at this hour." Then she smiled. "Good thing I'm no lady. Show me what needs doing." They worked through the night, a secret coalition bound by the promise of warmth. Jang found himself directing rather than doing, his usual solitary nature overwhelmed by the unexpected help. Sarah mixed clay to his specifications while Martha's husband cut pipes. Jacob's boys hauled stones with the enthusiasm of youth given purpose. As dawn approached, the system was complete. The final test came when Jiang built a full fire, letting it burn for 2 hours before dampening it completely. Then they waited. 1 hour. 2. 3. The platform remained warm, the stones radiating steady heat. "It works," Jacob said simply. "God in heaven. It actually works." The wind picked up as the sun rose, bringing the smell of snow. The storm was coming faster than predicted. Jang looked at his helpers, exhausted but triumphant, and made a decision that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. "I have enough materials for 3 more platforms. We have maybe 30 hours before the storm hits, if we work together." "The schoolhouse first," Sarah said immediately. "The children need warmth for learning." "My barn," Jacob added. "The animals, if they survive, we all survive." "The church," Martha suggested. "It's where people gather when things get bad." Jang nodded, already calculating materials and time. "We'll need every able-bodied person in town. This isn't about money or pride anymore." "What's it about then?" Sarah asked. "Survival," Jang replied, watching the northern horizon darken with approaching clouds. "And community." Word spread faster than wildfire. By noon, the general store had become a command center. Martha organized work crews while Sarah sketched simplified designs for quick construction. The banker, surprising everyone, opened his vault and offered interest-free loans for materials. Even Dale Cooper closed the saloon early, sending his customers to help. They worked with desperate efficiency, racing the weather. Jang moved between sites, teaching, adjusting, encouraging. The platform design was simplified for speed, less elegant than his original but functional. Children carried smaller stones while women mixed clay. Men hauled pipes and built frameworks. The preacher abandoned his prepared sermon to read from Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than 1. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. His congregation responded by working harder, faster, together. By nightfall, 2 platforms were nearly complete, one in the schoolhouse, one in the church. The barn would have to wait. The temperature was dropping fast, and the first snowflakes began to fall. Gentle warnings of the violence to come. "We're not going to make it," Jacob said, exhaustion clear in his voice. "We are," Jang replied, surprising himself with his confidence. "Because we have to." Sarah touched his arm gently. "You're not alone in this anymore." He looked at the townspeople, people who'd mocked him, bet against him, called him names, now working together under his direction, trusting his knowledge to see them through the storm. The transformation was as remarkable as any engineering feat. "No," he agreed quietly. "Not alone." The snow began falling harder, and the wind picked up, rattling windows and doors. The storm had arrived early, but they continued working, lanterns lighting their desperate race against winter's fury. The schoolhouse transformed into something extraordinary that week. Sarah stood before her students, pointer in hand. The simplified drawings of Jiang's heating system spread across the blackboard. Who can tell me why the Romans built their bathhouses this way? Little Emma Fletcher raised her hand eagerly. To stay warm without cutting down all their trees. Excellent, Emma. Conservation of resources, a lesson as valuable today as it was 2,000 years ago. The children had embraced the project with enthusiasm that surprised their parents. They drew elaborate pictures of the platform system, competed to explain the principles of heat retention, and begged to help with construction after school. Tommy Morrison had become something of a celebrity, having been the first child to lie on Jiang's original platform. "My pa says Mr. Jiang is a genius," Tommy announced proudly. "Says we've been fools, burning money all winter when we could have been burning sense." Sarah smiled, watching through the window as another group of men arrived at Jiang's ranch for the evening instruction session. These meetings had started secretly, just 3 or 4 ranchers gathering after dark, too proud to admit publicly they wanted to learn from the town tightwad. Now, 15 or 20 men crowded into Jiang's modest cabin each night, taking careful notes by lamplight. The women's sewing circle at the church had become equally divided. Half condemned Sarah's unseemly involvement with the bachelor rancher. The other half, led by Martha, defended her vigorously. "That girl has more sense than all of us combined," Martha declared, her needle flashing through fabric. "While we've been gossiping, she's been learning something that could save our families." Mrs. Harrison, the banker's wife, sniffed disapprovingly. "A proper lady doesn't involve herself with construction work. What will people think?" "That she's smart," Martha shot back. "And if you spent less time worrying about propriety and more time worrying about your children freezing, you'd be over there learning too." The conversation ended when Preacher William's wife, quiet Elizabeth, spoke for the first time in months. "I want to learn," she said simply. "My arthritis is so bad in winter I can barely move. If this platform could help." That evening, Sarah found herself teaching a mixed group women who'd snuck away from their households, older children eager to help, and even some of the rougher ranch hands who'd lost their bravado when faced with the reality of the approaching storm. "The key," Sarah explained, kneeling beside the schoolhouse platform, "is the thermal mass. These stones absorb heat slowly and release it slowly. Mr. Jiang calculates that 100 pounds of stone, heated to optimal temperature, can radiate warmth for approximately—" "Begging your pardon, miss," interrupted Carl Brennan, a teamster with hands like ham hocks. "But we don't need the fancy mathematics. Just show us how to build the damn pardon me the blessed thing." Sarah stood, brushing clay dust from her skirts. "Of course, let's start with the channel layout." At the general store, Martha noticed something remarkable happening. People were sharing materials. The Fletchers had extra stones and traded them for the Brennans' surplus clay. The Coopers contributed pipes salvaged from an old still in exchange for help with construction. Even Mr. Harrison had quietly donated several loads of fire bricks, though he insisted on anonymity. "It's like a barn raising," Martha told her husband that night. "Except we're raising hope." The secret night meetings at Jiang's ranch had evolved into something more. After the construction lessons, the men would linger, sharing their own knowledge. Jacob Fletcher knew masonry. Carl Brennan understood pipe fitting from his days in the Chicago stockyards. Old Samuel Wright, who'd rarely spoke to anyone, revealed he'd worked on steam engines and understood heat exchange better than most. "We've been neighbors for 10 years, Samuel told Jiang, "and this is the first time we've acted like it." Jiang found himself at the center of this transformation, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to deny the satisfaction of seeing his knowledge spread. 7 years of solitary planning had become a community endeavor almost overnight. The 4th night, Sarah arrived at the meeting with her father's engineering journals. "These might help," she said, setting them before Jiang. "Father's notes on heat conservation in railroad stations. Some principles might apply." Jiang opened the first journal reverently. Charles Whitfield's precise handwriting filled pages with calculations and observations. "Your father was brilliant," he said softly. "He would have loved this project," Sarah replied. "He always said the best engineering served the common good." Their eyes met across the lamplit table, and the room fell silent. The moment stretched until Jacob Fletcher cleared his throat loudly. "So, about them channels, should they curve or run straight?" The work continued, but something had shifted. Sarah found reasons to check on Jiang's progress daily. He discovered urgent needs to consult her father's journals each evening. The town noticed, of course. The betting book at the saloon gained a new category: wedding dates. Martha confronted Sarah while they mixed clay behind the church. "You know what people are saying?" "I know." Sarah's hands didn't pause in their work. "I also know that man has spent 7 years planning to save this town, asking nothing in return." "He's odd, Sarah. Unsociable. Set in his ways. He's principled, determined, brilliant." Sarah looked up, her eyes fierce. "And he's teaching us that sometimes the answer isn't spending more money, it's thinking differently." Martha studied the younger woman's face, then smiled. "Your children will be stubborn as mules." Sarah blushed but laughed. "We're building heating platforms, Martha, not planning families." "Sure you are, dear. Sure you are." The storm's approach had created an urgency that overrode old prejudices. When 3 Mexican families from the valley arrived, seeking help with their own platforms, Jiang welcomed them without hesitation. When the Chinese railroad workers camped outside town offered to trade labor for knowledge, he spent an entire night teaching through an interpreter. "You're giving it all away," Dale Cooper observed, having closed his saloon to help with construction. "You could charge a fortune for this knowledge." "My father died because we couldn't afford warmth," Jiang replied. "I won't let anyone else's father die for the same reason." The comment spread through town, repeated in hushed tones. The story of young Jiang, finding his father frozen in bed, working years to prevent such tragedy, it changed how people saw him. Not a miser, but a man driven by loss. Not antisocial, but focused on a goal larger than social niceties. By the end of the week, 12 platforms were under construction throughout the town. The schoolhouse and church systems were operational, tested successfully. Private homes had platforms in various stages of completion. The general store had been transformed into a supply depot, with Martha coordinating materials distribution with military precision. "We need a celebration," Preacher Williams announced. "When this storm passes, when we're all warm, we need to commemorate what we've accomplished." "If we survive," someone muttered. "We will," Sarah said firmly. "We have Jiang's gift." The phrase caught on. Within days, everyone was calling the heating systems Jiang's gift, much to his embarrassment. He tried explaining it was Roman engineering, adapted and modified, but the name stuck. The night before the storm was predicted to hit full force, the temperature plummeted. Ice formed inside windows, and breathing outdoors became painful. Animals huddled in barns, and families began their final preparations. Jiang made rounds to each platform installation, checking seals, adjusting airflow, offering last-minute advice. Sarah accompanied him, carrying extra tools and taking notes. They worked in comfortable partnership, communicating with glances and half-finished sentences. At the last house, the Widow Thompson's, where Sarah boarded, they paused on the porch. Snow was falling heavily now, driven by increasing wind. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, "for sharing your knowledge, for letting us help." "Thank you," Jiang replied, "for making me remember that knowledge is worthless if not shared." She reached for his hand, propriety abandoned in the face of approaching danger. "We're going to get through this." He squeezed gently, his calloused palm warm against hers. Together. The wind howled louder, and they separated reluctantly. Tomorrow would test everything they'd built, everything they'd learned. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Jiang didn't feel alone in his fight against winter. As he walked home through the driving snow, he saw lights in windows throughout town, families working on their platforms, neighbors helping neighbors. The community united by common purpose. His gift had become theirs, transformed from a solitary obsession into a collective salvation. The storm would come, but they were ready. The telegraph key clattered its urgent message through the morning quiet. Harold Simmons, the operator, translated with trembling fingers. Massive blizzard. 3 days minimum. Temperatures 30 below. Seek shelter immediately. May God preserve you. Within minutes, the news had spread through town like wildfire. People abandoned their daily routines, racing to complete final preparations. The general store became a battlefield of desperate customers grabbing last supplies: salt pork, flour, kerosene, anything that might help them survive. "There's no more firewood," someone shouted. Cooper sold his last cord. $3 for an armload, another voice called. $5, 10. Martha stood on a crate, her voice cutting through the panic. "Stop this madness. We share what we have, or we all perish." Jang's platforms. "Jang's platforms aren't finished, Mrs. Harrison cried. "Half of them need another day's work." The crowd's fear was palpable. Through the window, they could see the northern sky, black as evening though it was barely noon. The temperature had already dropped 10 degrees in the past hour. Jang pushed through the crowd, Sarah close behind. His voice, usually soft, carried surprising authority. "Every platform that's properly sealed will work, even without final stones. We have 6 hours, maybe 8. Here's what we do." He divided the townspeople into teams with military precision. Team 1 would seal any open channels with emergency clay mixture. Team 2 would gather every available blanket and cloth to insulate incomplete platforms. Team 3 would move elderly and infirm to buildings with completed systems. "What about the animals?" Jacob Fletcher asked. "If we lose livestock, we starve come spring." "The church," Jang replied, "will shelter what we can there. The platform's large enough to warm the space." Preacher Williams nodded immediately. "The Lord's house shelters all his creatures." The work that followed was frantic but organized. Children ran messages between work sites. Women mixed clay until their hands bled. Men hauled final stones through wind that threatened to knock them flat. The first real snow began falling at 2 o'clock, heavy, dense flakes that accumulated inches within minutes. Sarah coordinated from the schoolhouse, her father's journals open as she answered desperate questions. "Yes, newspaper insulation will work." "No. Don't seal that pipe, it needs airflow. The channels must slope downward, always downward." At Jiang's ranch, he faced an agonizing decision. His own platform was perfect, tested, ready, but the widow Henderson, elderly and alone, had nothing. The Mexican families in the valley had partial systems. The Chinese workers had knowledge but no materials. "Take my extra stones," he told them. "The pipes from my barn, whatever you need." "But Jang," Jacob protested, "you've saved for years." "And for what?" "To survive alone while others freeze." Jang was already loading his wagon. "My father didn't die so I could hoard warmth like a miser hoards gold." The animals sensed catastrophe. Horses whinnied continuously. Cattle bellowed. Chickens flew at their coop walls. The Fletcher's old dog howled a sound that raised goosebumps on those who heard it. Birds flew in confused circles before dropping from the sky, frozen mid-flight. By 4 o'clock, visibility had dropped to mere feet. Ropes were strung between buildings to guide people through the white blindness. The schoolhouse bell rang continuously, a beacon in the storm. "Temperature's already at 0, Harold announced, reading his thermometer with difficulty. "And falling fast." Sarah found Jang working on the widow Henderson's platform, his hands blue with cold as he sealed the final channel. "You need to get to shelter," she said, touching his frozen cheek. "Almost finished. One more seal." "Jang, please." The wind nearly tore the words from her mouth. "You can't save everyone if you're dead." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw her fear. Not for herself, but for him. "All right. Let's get her fire started and test the system. They built a modest fire in the widow's stove, watching anxiously as smoke began flowing through the channels. Within minutes, warmth spread across the platform. The widow, wrapped in every blanket she owned, lay down on the warm stones with tears streaming down her face. "Bless you," she whispered. "Bless you both." The journey back to town required following the guide rope hand over hand. The wind screamed like a living thing, driving snow horizontally. Sarah stumbled, and Jang caught her, pulling her against him as they fought through the storm. They reached the schoolhouse to find it packed with families whose homes weren't ready. Children huddled around the platform, their parents feeding the stove carefully, following Jang's written instructions posted on the wall. "It's working," someone cried. "Feel the whole platform's warm." Similar reports came from the church, where Jacob Fletcher had brought 3 cows, a dozen chickens, and 2 pigs along with several families. The animals settled near the platform, their body heat adding to the warmth. Preacher Williams led prayers while his wife distributed what food they had. At the saloon, Dale Cooper had constructed a rushed platform in his back room. "Never thought I'd be burning good whiskey-selling wood for heat," he said, breaking up chairs for fuel. "But Jang says we only need to burn for 3 hours to get 8 hours of warmth." By nightfall, the storm had become a monster. The wind reached 60 miles per hour, driving snow through every tiny gap. Windows shattered under the pressure. Roofs groaned and shifted. The temperature gauge at the telegraph office read -20 before the mercury froze. Jang made one last check of the schoolhouse system, then collapsed on a bench, exhaustion finally claiming him. Sarah sat beside him, pulling a blanket over both of them. Around them, families clustered on and around the platform, feeling its steady warmth. "You did it," Sarah whispered. "You saved them." "We did it," he corrected. "All of us." Through the night, the platforms performed exactly as designed. Fires were fed for 3 hours, then dampened. The heated stone and clay radiated warmth for the rest of the night. People actually slept, while the worst blizzard in memory raged outside. In the church, Preacher Williams held midnight service by lamplight. His sermon was simple. "Tonight we witness the miracle of community. One man's knowledge, freely shared. Many hands, working together. This is how God intended us to live." At the general store, Martha and her husband hosted 8 families whose homes weren't safe. They'd built a makeshift platform using Jiang's emergency instructions, and while not perfect, it kept the space survivable. Stories were shared, food distributed equally, and children played quietly, understanding the gravity of their situation, but not everyone was safe. Reports filtered in through those brave enough to check on neighbors. The Jameson farm, too proud to accept help, had run out of wood by midnight. The Garrett family, who'd mocked Jang's invention until too late, huddled around a dying fire. 3 bachelor cowboys who'd spent their money on whiskey instead of warmth faced the night with only their saddle blankets. "We have to help them," Sarah said when word arrived. "We can't," Jacob replied heavily. "No one could survive going out in this." Jang stood slowly. "The Jameson place is only 200 yards from here, with ropes, careful planning." "It's suicide," Dale Cooper said flatly. "It's necessary," Jang replied. The rescue party consisted of Jang, Jacob, and 2 of the strongest ranch hands. They tied themselves together with rope, wrapped in every available layer, and ventured into the white hell. Sarah watched from the window, seeing nothing but snow, praying to any power that might listen. They returned 40 minutes later, dragging the barely conscious Jameson family. Frostbite had already claimed Mr. Jameson's fingers, and the children were hypothermic, but they were alive. The platform's warmth began its healing work as Sarah and the other women rubbed circulation back into frozen limbs. "The others," Jang said through chattering teeth. "We have to." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "You've done enough. You can't save those who refuse to save themselves." It was the hardest lesson of the night, knowing when to stop trying. Jang struggled with it. This man who'd spent 7 years planning to prevent exactly such deaths. But as the storm intensified, even he had to admit defeat. Some battles couldn't be won, only survived. Dawn brought no relief, only a slight graying of the white chaos outside. But inside, around the platforms, children played quietly while adults planned rationing and care rotations. The systems were working. The platforms held their heat. They would survive. Day 1, Martha announced, marking her calendar. 2 more to go. Jiang looked at the faces around him, people who'd mocked him now alive because of his gift, working together as they never had before. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, around the warm stones, community had been forged as surely as any heat treating of metal. We'll make it, he said, and for the first time, truly believed it. The longest night began with the temperature gauge reading 40 below, though no one trusted the accuracy after the mercury had frozen solid hours earlier. Jiang lay on his platform at the schoolhouse, having given his own cabin to a family of 5 whose roof had collapsed under the snow's weight. The stones beneath him radiated steady warmth, exactly as his calculations had predicted. The fire had been out for 6 hours, yet the platform maintained a comfortable 68 degrees. Around him, families slept fitfully. Children whimpered in their dreams while adults kept vigilant watch. The storm hadn't lessened. If anything, it had intensified. The wind screamed with such violence that conversation required shouting, and the building shook with each gust. "Can't sleep." Sarah appeared beside him, carrying 2 cups of chicory coffee, the last of their supplies. "Listening," Jiang replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "The building's holding, but barely." She settled beside him on the warm stones, propriety long abandoned in the face of survival. "Your thermometer says it's still 68 degrees on the platform." "That's remarkable." The Roman design, improved with modern understanding of thermal dynamics. He sipped the bitter coffee. "Your father's journals helped immensely. His notes on heat retention in railroad water towers gave me the idea for the sealed chamber system. He would have been proud to contribute." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter. "How are the other sites?" Jacob checked 2 hours ago. "The church is holding steady. 30 families, 8 cows, countless chickens, and 1 very confused pig. All warm. Martha's store has become a secondary shelter. Even Dale's saloon is functioning. And the families who wouldn't listen?" Jiang's jaw tightened. "We don't know. No one can reach them now." The conversation was interrupted by young Tommy Morrison, crying out in his sleep. His mother soothed him, but his words were audible. "The white darkness. It's eating everything." "The children will remember this forever," Sarah said softly. "Good. They should remember. Remember how the town came together. Remember how knowledge and cooperation defeated nature's fury." Jiang paused. "Remember to never mock what they don't understand." At midnight, Harold Simmons made his way from the telegraph office with devastating news. The lines were down, cut by ice and wind. They were completely isolated. No word could get out. None could come in. They were alone with the storm. "How much food do we have?" someone asked. Martha, ever practical, had already calculated. "If we're careful, 4 days. Water's not a problem, we can melt snow, but firewood, Each platform needs only 3 hours of fire per day," Jiang reminded them. "We can burn furniture, books, anything combustible. The efficiency of the system means we need far less than traditional heating." Preacher William stood slowly. "Then we share everything. Food, fuel, warmth. No family hoards while another starves." Agreement was unanimous. The storm had erased social distinctions. The banker's wife worked beside the saloon girls to prepare meals. The Mexican families shared their dried peppers and corn. The Chinese workers contributed tea and rice they'd carefully preserved. At 3 in the morning, a terrible crash shook the building. Part of the roof had given way in the back storage room. Snow poured in like a frozen waterfall. Men rushed to block the gap with overturned desks and benches, while women moved children away from the breach. "The platform!" someone cried. "If snow gets into the channels?" "It won't," Jang said firmly. "Already directing repairs. The system is sealed. Even if the building fails, the platform will continue functioning." They worked through the remaining darkness, shoring up weak points, redistributing weight, praying the structure would hold. The platform continued radiating heat, its warmth now even more precious as cold invaded through the damaged roof. Dawn arrived as a slight lessening of darkness. Nothing more. The storm continued unabated, but inside, around the platforms, life continued with stubborn determination. Sarah organized lessons for the children, using charcoal on the floor to teach arithmetic. If a platform uses 3 pounds of wood per day, and we have 90 pounds, how many days? At the church, similar scenes played out. Preacher Williams led hymns to keep spirits up while his wife rationed food with mathematical precision. The animals, surprisingly calm, provided additional warmth and even entertainment for the children. Jacob Fletcher made the dangerous journey between buildings, rope-guided and ice-covered, to report on conditions. The Henderson widow is alive, warm on her platform. The Jamesons are recovering, though Mr. Jameson will lose 3 fingers to frostbite. But, "Tell us," Jang said quietly. "The Garrett house is dark, no smoke. The 3 cowboys at the Ridgeline bunkhouse, same." Silence greeted this news. 5 lives, probably lost to pride and stubbornness. Jang stared at the floor, calculating whether he could have done more, reached them somehow. Sarah touched his shoulder. "You gave them every opportunity. Some people won't accept help until it's too late." "My father accepted help," Jang said bitterly. "From neighbors, from the church. It wasn't enough. That's why I spent 7 years making sure it would be enough this time." "And it is," she said firmly. "Count the living, not the lost." By afternoon, they discovered an unexpected benefit of the platform system. The steady, radiant heat had a calming effect. Children played quietly on the warm stones. Adults found themselves relaxing despite the danger. The constant temperature, so different from the fluctuating heat of regular fires, created a cocoon of comfort. "It's like summer stones by the river," one child said dreamily, stretched out on the platform. "Better," her mother replied, stroking her hair. "River stones cool down. These stay warm." Dale Cooper, the saloon keeper who'd led much of the mockery against Jang, approached during the afternoon meal. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "I was a fool." "You were skeptical," Jang replied. "That's natural." "No, I was mean-spirited, placed bets on your failure, laughed at your economies." Dale's weathered face showed genuine remorse. "You could have let me freeze. Instead, you taught me your system." "Knowledge belongs to everyone," Jang said. "My father taught me that, before he died." The second night brought new challenges. The storm, impossibly, intensified further. The entire building groaned continuously. More sections of roof gave way. Snowdrifts reached the windows, blocking what little light remained. They were being buried alive. But the platforms continued their patient work. Heat rose from the stones, warming bodies and spirits. People shared stories to pass the time. Martha told of her grandmother's journey west. Jacob described his first winter on the frontier. The Chinese workers, through an interpreter, shared tales of their homeland. Sarah and Jang worked together through the night, maintaining the fire schedules, checking the platform's performance, ensuring even heat distribution. They moved in practice synchronization, communicating with glances and gestures. "We make a good team," Sarah observed during a quiet moment. "Yes," Jang agreed, then added softly, "in all things." She looked at him directly. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Jiang?" "It's a statement of intent, contingent on survival." "How romantic!" She laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. "I accept. Also contingent on survival." Around them, others smiled despite their fear. Love blooming in crisis gave hope that there would be an after, a future beyond the storm. The third dawn brought the first sign of hope. The wind, while still fierce, had lost its killing edge. The snow fell heavily but no longer horizontally. Harold Simmons, venturing out on ropes, returned with his thermometer showing only -10. "The storm's breaking," he announced. Cheers erupted. Premature but necessary. They'd survived the worst. The platforms had held. The community had held. Against odds that would have killed them separately. Together they'd endured. Jiang stood on a bench, his voice carrying over the celebration. "The danger's not over. We need to maintain discipline, keep the schedules, share resources. But yes, we've survived the worst." He looked across the room at faces that had mocked him, doubted him, and now respected him. The transformation was complete, but more importantly, the knowledge was spread. Dozens of families now understood the platform system. The technology would spread across the frontier, saving countless lives. "Your gift saved us," Preacher Williams said solemnly. "Our cooperation saved us," Jiang corrected. "The platforms are just heated stones and clay. What matters is that we worked together, shared knowledge, helped each other." Sarah joined him on the bench, but it started with one man's determination to prevent others from suffering his loss. As the storm continued to weaken through the day, people began planning for the aftermath. Who would need new roofs? How would they clear the snow? What supplies would need replenishing? But these were problems for the living. And thanks to Jiang's gift, most of them remained among that number. The platforms continued their work, patient and consistent, radiating warmth like the community had learned to radiate cooperation. The longest night was ending, but the lessons learned would last generations. The line stretched from Jiang's cabin door to the main road. 50 people or more, waiting patiently in the crystal-clear morning air. The storm had passed 12 hours ago, leaving behind a transformed landscape drifts 20 feet high, buildings half buried, trees snapped like matchsticks, but also leaving behind a transformed community. "Next," Jiang called, and Mrs. Patterson stepped forward with her husband, both carrying notebooks. "We want to build 2 platforms," she said without preamble. "One for our house, one for my mother's cabin. We've brought our own paper for the drawings." Jiang spread out the now familiar sketches on his table, weighted down with river stones. "The foundation is crucial. You need a slope of exactly 15 degrees for proper smoke flow." Sarah worked beside him, creating simplified instruction sheets with clear drawings. She developed a system: 1 page for materials needed, 1 for foundation preparation, 1 for channel construction, and 1 for the final sealing process. Each family received a complete set. "Remember," she emphasized to the Pattersons, "the clay mixture must be exact. 3 parts clay, 1 part sand, 1 part straw. Too much sand and it cracks. Too much straw and it doesn't seal." Outside, Jacob Fletcher had organized work crews. The strongest men cleared paths between buildings while others salvaged materials from damaged structures. Every piece of metal pipe was precious now, every suitable stone valuable. Tommy Morrison ran between groups, carrying messages. "Mr. Fletcher says there's good stones in the creek bed, but we gotta dig through 6 feet of snow to reach them." The saloon had been converted into a workshop. Dale Cooper supervised the cutting and fitting of salvaged pipes, while his former bartender taught the proper mixing of clay. The gambling tables were covered with technical drawings, the bar lined with numbered stones awaiting installation. "Never thought I'd see the day," Dale muttered, watching the town banker carefully measuring pipe lengths. Harrison handling actual tools instead of just money. "Crisis makes everyone equal," Preacher Williams observed, helping to carry stones. "Though I suspect some will forget that when comfort returns." But for now, the equality held. When the Mexican families from the valley arrived, still shivering from their journey through the snow, they were welcomed into the instruction line. When the Chinese workers offered to trade their expertise in brickwork for platform knowledge, the exchange was made gladly. "How do you know it will work in our adobe houses?" asked Miguel Hernandez. Through his daughter, who translated. "Heat is heat," Jiang replied. "Stone is stone. The principles remain the same whether the building is wood, brick, or adobe. Let me show you the adjustments needed." Sarah watched him teach with infinite patience, repeating explanations, demonstrating techniques, never showing frustration when people didn't understand immediately. This was the same man who'd worked alone for 7 years, hoarding his knowledge like treasure. The transformation was remarkable. "You've changed," she told him during a brief break. "The town changed first," he replied. "They stopped seeing me as a miser and started seeing me as someone who might help them." How could I not respond? Martha arrived with lunch for the workers, thin soup and hard bread, but hot and welcome. "Food's going to be scarce until the supply trains can get through," she announced. "But warmth we have plenty of, thanks to Jiang." The afternoon brought unexpected challenges. Old Samuel Wright, attempting to build his own platform, had confused the measurements. His channels ran uphill instead of down, trapping smoke instead of directing it. "It's ruined," he said dejectedly. "All that work for nothing." "Not ruined," Jiang assured him, examining the structure. "We can modify it. Cut new channels here and here. Seal the old ones. You'll lose some efficiency. But it will work." They spent 2 hours correcting the mistake, Jiang teaching not just the how but the why. "Understanding the principle matters more than memorizing the steps," he explained. "If you understand why heat rises, why smoke flows, you can solve problems when they arise." The toughest ranch hand in the territory, Bill Bear McKenzie, lay down on Jiang's original platform with an expression of wonder. "It's like magic," he said, his usually gruff voice soft. "Warm as summer earth." "Not magic," Tommy Morrison piped up, proud of his knowledge. "It's thermal mass and heat retention Miss Sarah taught us." Bear laughed, a sound no one had heard before. "Well, if it ain't magic, it's close enough for me." He lay back on the warm stones and, to everyone's amazement, tears leaked from his weathered eyes. "My brother froze to death in the blizzard of '72. If we'd had this then..." Similar stories emerged throughout the day. Everyone, it seemed, had lost someone to winter's cruelty. Parents, children, friends, the frontier had claimed them all. But now, with Jiang's gift, future losses could be prevented. The instruction continued relentlessly. Sarah's hands cramped from writing. Her voice grew hoarse from explaining, but she didn't stop. Neither did Jiang, though exhaustion was clear in his movements. They were racing against time. Winter wasn't over, and another storm could come any day. "We need more teachers," Sarah finally admitted. "We can't reach everyone fast enough." "Then we create them," Jiang decided. "Those who've successfully built platforms become instructors for others." By evening, they'd established a teaching hierarchy. Jiang and Sarah trained the primary instructors Jacob, Martha, Dale, and surprisingly, Bear McKenzie, who'd shown an unexpected aptitude for the technical aspects. These 4 would train others, who would train still others, spreading the knowledge exponentially. The schoolhouse became the center of operations. Sarah had covered every wall with drawings and instructions. Children who'd learned the principles taught their parents. The youngest Morrison girl, barely 6, could recite the proper clay mixture from memory. "School's important," Sarah told the gathering crowd. "But this is education for survival. Every family needs to understand these principles." Preacher Williams offered a prayer that evening, thanking the Almighty for preserving them through the storm. But then he added something unexpected. "And thank you, Lord, for teaching us that sometimes salvation comes not from above, but from beside, from our neighbors, our community, our shared knowledge." "Amen," the crowd responded, but Jiang heard the special fervor in their voices. They were thanking him as much as the Almighty, though he wished they wouldn't. As darkness fell, Families dispersed to continue their platform construction by lamplight. The sound of hammering and sawing echoed through the cold night. Children carried stones, women mixed clay, men fitted pipes. The entire town had become a workshop. Sarah found Jiang standing outside, looking up at the clear stars. "What are you thinking, Wayne?" "My father would have lived," he said simply. "If he'd had this knowledge, he would have lived. And because of you, countless fathers will live, mothers, children, grandparents, all of them warm through winters that would have killed them." "It shouldn't have taken 7 years," Jiang said with regret. "If I'd shared the knowledge as I developed it, if I'd trusted the town—" "You weren't ready," Sarah interrupted. "Neither were they. Sometimes the right knowledge needs the right moment." Harold Simmons approached with news from his repaired telegraph. "Word's spreading about the platforms. Towns all along the frontier are asking for information. The newspaper in Denver wants to send a reporter." Jiang looked uncomfortable. "I don't want fame." "But you want the knowledge spread," Sarah pointed out. "A newspaper article could save lives from here to the Dakotas." He nodded reluctantly. "Then we'll teach the reporter too. Make sure they understand it properly." Inside the schoolhouse, Bear McKenzie was explaining thermodynamics to a group of cowboys, using language that would have made Sarah blush if she hadn't been so impressed by his understanding. "See? Boys, heat's like cattle. It wants to move from where there's lots to where there's little. The platform just makes a real comfortable holding pen for it." "Never thought I'd see Bear teaching anything but fighting," Jacob whispered to Jiang. "Everyone has hidden depths," Jiang replied. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal them." The next morning brought more students, some traveling from as far as Culver's Ridge, 30 miles away. They'd heard about the miraculous warmth that had saved the town, about the strange rancher who gave away fortune-making knowledge for free. "Why don't you patent it?" a businessman from Denver asked. "You could be wealthy beyond imagining." "I am wealthy," Jiang replied, gesturing to the busy, warm schoolhouse full of learning families. "This is worth more than money," Sarah added. "Besides, you can't patent ancient Roman technology. Jiang simply adapted it for frontier use." The businessman shook his head in amazement. "You're either saints or fools." "Perhaps both," Martha called out, elbow deep in clay. "But we're warm saints and fools." The work continued through the week. By now, over 40 platforms were under construction or completed. Each successful build created another teacher, another spreader of knowledge. The geometric progression Jiang had hoped for was becoming reality. Children drew pictures of their platforms to send to cousins in other towns. Women wrote detailed letters to sisters and mothers, explaining the construction. Men rode to neighboring ranches, carrying sketches and material lists. "It's like a beneficial plague," Preacher Williams observed, "spreading from person to person, but bringing life instead of death." On the 7th day after the storm, they held the first community celebration in the church. The platform there had been decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons. Families brought what food they could spare, creating a feast from scarcity. Jiang was pushed to the front, despite his protests. The entire town wanted to thank him properly, but when he stood before them, he turned the attention elsewhere. Jacob Fletcher, who worked through the night to help build the first platforms. Martha, who organized our supplies and kept us fed. Sarah Whitfield, who translated knowledge into teaching. Dale Cooper, who converted his saloon into a workshop. Bear McKenzie, who became our unexpected engineering expert. Preacher Williams, who reminded us that we're stronger together. Every family who shared their food, their materials, their labor. You saved yourselves. I just provided information. But the town wouldn't let him deflect entirely. They'd prepared something, a plaque, carved from wood salvaged from the storm. It read, "Jiang's gift, knowledge freely given, warmth eternal." "We're mounting it in the schoolhouse," Sarah announced. "So every child who learns here remembers that the greatest wealth is knowledge shared." Jiang struggled with emotion. this solitary man suddenly at the center of a grateful community. Sarah took his hand publicly, scandalizing some, delighting others. "You did good, Thomas," she said, using his first name for the first time in public. "We all did good," he replied, but squeezed her hand in thanks. As the celebration continued around them, Jiang allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 7 years of planning, saving, studying, all for this moment when knowledge became community property, when warmth became universal right rather than purchased privilege. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more platforms to build, more people to teach, more knowledge to spread. But tonight, in the warm church filled with grateful families, Jiang finally understood that his father's death hadn't been in vain. It had led to this, a gift of warmth that would spread across the frontier, saving lives for generations to come. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall, nothing like the killing blizzard 3 weeks past. The entire town glowed with warmth, not just from the platforms that now graced every home, but from something deeper. Candles flickered in windows, and the sound of carolers drifted through the streets. Children's voices bright against the winter darkness. Sarah stood in the schoolhouse, adjusting the evergreen garlands while Jiang checked the platform's temperature one final time. 70 degrees, he announced with satisfaction. Perfect for the celebration. Families began arriving, each contributing what they could to the communal feast. Martha brought preserved peaches, saved since summer. The Fletchers contributed smoked ham. The Mexican families had prepared tamales, teaching others the tradition. Even the Chinese workers, initially hesitant about the Christian celebration, brought tea and rice cakes to share. "Look at this," Preacher Williams marveled, surveying the laden tables. 3 months ago, we barely spoke to half these people. Now we feast as one family." Bear Mackenzie arrived with a surprise, a perfectly crafted miniature platform, complete with tiny working channels, built as a teaching model. "Figured the young ones could learn better with something they could see all at once," he said gruffly, embarrassed by the admiration his work received. Tommy Morrison immediately claimed the spot nearest the model, explaining its workings to anyone who would listen. "See, the smoke goes here, then here, then here." Mr. Bear made it so you can see through the sides. The celebration officially began when Harold Simmons burst through the door with news. "Telegraph from Denver. The territorial governor wants to fund platform construction throughout Colorado. They're calling it the Jiang Initiative." Embarrassment colored Jiang's face. "I didn't want—" "Too late for modesty," Sarah interrupted, kissing his cheek publicly. "You're famous whether you like it or not." They'd been married 2 weeks earlier, a simple ceremony in the church, the platform keeping everyone warm during the service. Sarah had moved into Jiang's cabin, bringing her books and her father's journals, combining their knowledge into what she called the Frontier Thermal Library. Dale Cooper stood, raising a cup of cider. "A toast to Jiang, who saved us from ourselves as much as from the cold. To community," Jiang countered, redirecting attention as always. "To warm beds and warmer hearts," Martha added, causing laughter. The stories began then, as they always did when families gathered. Each person shared their memory of the storm, of the fear, of the salvation found in heated stone and clay. But new stories emerged, too, plans for the future, dreams made possible by reduced heating costs. "I can afford to send my boys to school in Denver," Jacob announced. "Not spending everything on firewood means we have savings for the first time." "I'm expanding the store," Martha added, "adding a section just for platform supplies. Already have orders from 3 other towns." The transformation was economic as much as social. Families that had barely survived now had resources for improvement. The constant drain of winter fuel costs had been reduced to a trickle. Money once spent on mere survival could go toward education, expansion, growth. "Spring's going to be interesting," observed Banker Harrison. "I've had more loan applications for business ventures in the last week than in the previous year, all because people aren't afraid of winter anymore." The children performed a nativity play, with Tommy Morrison insisting on explaining how the manger could have been warmer with the platform system, causing fond laughter from the adults. Little Emma Fletcher sang Silent Night so sweetly that even Bear McKenzie wiped his eyes. As midnight approached, Preacher Williams called for attention. "Before we close this blessed evening, I believe Jang has something to announce." Jang stood reluctantly, Sarah encouraging him with a gentle push. "The Denver newspaper has agreed to publish complete platform instructions in a special supplement, free distribution throughout the territories. They're also funding 10 teaching teams to travel to remote settlements." Cheers erupted, but Jang wasn't finished. "Sarah and I will lead one team. We leave in April. After the spring thaw, we'll travel for 6 months, teaching wherever we're needed." "But you'll come back?" Martha asked anxiously. "Of course," Sarah assured her. "This is home, but the knowledge must spread. Every family deserves what we have." Old Samuel Wright stood shakily. "I've got something to say. Lived here 40 years, seen neighbors freeze, children die, good people broken by winter's cruelty. Thought it was just the way things were." He paused, voice thick with emotion. "Jang showed us it didn't have to be that way. That's not just engineering. That's revolution. Revolution through cooperation," Jang said softly. "That's what matters." The evening wound down gently, families departing into the soft snowfall. Children clutched small gifts, carved wooden toys, knitted mittens, precious penny candy, but the real gift had already been given and received the warmth that would see them through every winter to come. Sarah and Jong were among the last to leave, helping Martha clean the schoolhouse. "Your father would be proud," Martha told Sarah. "His journals contributing to such good—" "He believed knowledge should serve humanity," Sarah replied. Jang made that belief reality. They walked home through streets that would have been deadly just weeks before. Now, smoke rose from chimneys in modest streams, not the desperate pillars of families burning everything to survive. Windows glowed with lamplight instead of being shuttered against the cold. The town had been reborn. Spring arrived early that year, as if nature itself apologized for the brutal winter. The first territorial delegation arrived in March: engineers, journalists, and government officials, all eager to learn about the platforms that had achieved a zero-death winter in a town previously known for its winter casualties. Jang taught them patiently, assisted by his growing team of instructors. Bear McKenzie had become particularly skilled at explaining the concepts to practical-minded folks. Jacob Fletcher handled the masonry aspects. Dale Cooper, surprisingly, proved gifted at organizing materials and work crews. "You've created something remarkable," the lead engineer from Denver told Jang. "Not just the platforms, but the teaching system, the way knowledge transfers from person to person." "Knowledge wants to spread," Jang replied. "We just stopped holding it back." The Denver newspaper published its special supplement in April, with detailed drawings Sarah had spent weeks perfecting. Orders for copies came from as far as Oregon and Texas. Universities requested information. The Smithsonian sent a representative to document the adaptation of ancient technology to frontier needs. But fame sat uncomfortably on Jiang. He preferred the workshop to the lecture hall, teaching individuals rather than addressing crowds. Sarah handled much of the public attention, her education and communication skills perfectly suited to the task. "You're the face of the movement," she told him one evening as they prepared for their teaching journey. "But I can be its voice." "Our movement," he corrected. None of this would have worked without the community accepting it, improving it, spreading it. Their departure in late April became a town celebration. Wagons loaded with materials, drawings, and models. Bear McKenzie would accompany them for the first leg, having developed his own innovations he wanted to share. "Never thought I'd become a teacher," Bear admitted. "Certainly never thought I'd enjoy it." The town gathered to see them off. Banners read, "Spread the warmth," and "Jang's gift goes forth." Children presented wildflower bouquets. The brass band played, slightly off-key but enthusiastic. Preacher Williams offered a traveling blessing. "May your journey spread warmth wherever you go, both in body and spirit. May the knowledge you share save lives as it saved ours." Mr. Harrison, the banker, presented an unexpected gift, a fund established by the town's grateful citizens to support platform construction in communities that couldn't afford materials. "Consider it an investment in humanity," he said. The formerly cold businessman now understanding that some returns couldn't be measured in dollars. As the wagons rolled out, Jiang looked back at the town that had mocked him, accepted him, and finally celebrated him. Every building now bore the telltale signs of platform installation, the carefully placed chimney modifications, the slight raising of certain floors. But more than physical changes, he saw social ones. Former strangers waved from shared doorways. Children of different backgrounds played together. The storm had broken barriers that decades of proximity hadn't breached. "Regrets?" Sarah asked, noting his backward glance. "None," he replied. "Well, one. I wish my father could see this." "He does," she said firmly. "Through every family that stays warm, every child that doesn't lose a parent to winter, every community that learns to share rather than hoard." The first stop on their journey was Culver's Ridge, where preliminary platform construction had already begun based on written instructions. But mistakes had been made, channels too narrow, clay mixture wrong, stone placement inefficient. Jiang didn't criticize, instead using the errors as teaching opportunities. "Failure is education," he told the frustrated builders. "Now you know what doesn't work, which is as valuable as knowing what does." By summer's end, they'd visited 17 communities, teaching over 300 families directly and training 50 new instructors. Letters from the original town reached them regularly, reporting on improvements, innovations, and lives saved. Martha wrote, "The Johnson baby survived pneumonia because their house stayed warm. In previous years, that child would have died. Your gift keeps giving. Jiang." The railroad company, impressed by the reduced death rate among their workers' families, funded platform installation in all their station houses. The military began adapting the design for frontier forts. Churches incorporated platforms into their construction plans, making them true sanctuaries against winter. But the most meaningful letter came from a stranger in Nebraska. "My grandfather froze to death in his cabin 5 years ago. We found your instructions in the Denver paper, built the platform before this winter. My father, 73 years old, slept warm every night. Thank you for saving him." Jiang read it aloud to Sarah as they camped under autumn stars, their teaching journey nearly complete. "This makes everything worthwhile," he said. "Everything was already worthwhile," Sarah replied. "This just confirms it." They returned to town in October to find it transformed yet again. A platform construction company had been established, employing 20 people. The school had added thermal engineering to its curriculum. Bear McKenzie had opened a workshop dedicated to platform innovation, developing improvements that increased efficiency by 10%. The second winter tested the systems again, but this time the town was ready, not just with platforms, but with community systems for sharing resources, checking on elderly neighbors, and maintaining the heating systems. The death rate wasn't just zero, there were fewer illness overall, as consistent warmth prevented many respiratory ailments. The following Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the first celebration, the town gathered again in the church. This time, delegations from 6 other towns joined them, all communities that had adopted platform heating. The church platform, decorated again with evergreen boughs, radiated warmth for the crowd of over 200. Jiang was presented with a congressional commendation for service to humanity through innovation and education. He accepted it on behalf of the entire town, insisting every name be read of those who'd helped spread the knowledge. "This isn't my achievement," he said, as he always did. "It belongs to everyone who chose cooperation over isolation, sharing over hoarding, community over solitude." But the town knew better. They'd renamed Main Street to Jiang Avenue, despite his protests. The schoolhouse bore a permanent plaque declaring it the birthplace of Jiang's gift. Children learned about thermal mass and heat retention alongside their letters and numbers. Sarah announced that evening that she was expecting their first child. "Due in spring," she said. When the world warms naturally, that child will never know a cold night, Martha declared, thanks to its father's gift. As the celebration continued, Jiang stepped outside into the gentle snowfall. The town spread before him, every window glowing, smoke rising modestly from chimneys, families warm and safe inside. 7 years of solitary planning had become a community revolution, spreading across the frontier like beneficial wildfire. Thomas Jiang had started with a simple goal: prevent others from suffering his father's fate. He'd achieved something greater. He'd taught a community that knowledge shared was warmth multiplied, that cooperation could conquer nature's cruelty, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply caring enough to share what you knew. The platforms would continue spreading, evolving, improving. Universities would study them, engineers would refine them, and historians would document them. But here, in this small frontier town, they would always be simply Jiang's gift, the warm stones that taught a community to share heat and heart alike. Inside the church, Sarah found him in the snow. "Come back to the warmth," she said. "I am warm," he replied, pulling her close, "warmer than I ever dreamed possible." Together they returned to the celebration, to their community, to the future they'd built on a foundation of heated stone and clay. The platform radiated its steady heat, patient and constant, much like the man who'd given it to the world. And in that warmth, the frontier found not just survival, but the promise of prosperity, one shared lesson at a time. The warmth between stones became the warmth between hearts. Jiang's 7 years of solitary sacrifice, born from a son's grief over his father's needless death, transformed into a community's salvation. What began as mockery, calling him Tightwad Jiang, and betting on his failure, ended in profound gratitude as families slept warm through killing cold. The true gift wasn't just the heated platforms, but the lesson they carried: knowledge hoarded saves no one, but knowledge shared multiplies infinitely. When Jiang chose community over isolation, when neighbors chose cooperation over pride, they discovered that survival isn't about individual wealth, but collective wisdom. Every family that learned to build platforms became teachers for others, creating an endless chain of giving. Sarah's father's journals, Martha's organizing skills, Bear's unexpected engineering talent, Jacob's masonry knowledge — everyone had something valuable to contribute. The platforms worked because the community worked together. Gratitude replaced mockery, respect replaced ridicule, and family expanded beyond blood to include everyone willing to help and learn. The frontier learned that sometimes the strangest ideas from the most unexpected people carry salvation, and that judging others for their economies or eccentricities might blind us to the very gifts that could save us. Have you ever been mocked or dismissed for being different, like Jiang was for his frugal ways, only to have those same people later need exactly what made you different?